When Khamzat Chimaev first entered the UFC, he didn't look like a future superstar. He didn't have the polished image. He didn't speak much English. He wasn't constantly promoting himself on podcasts. And he definitely didn't arrive with the mainstream hype of someone like Conor McGregor. But within the span of just 66 days, Khamzat Chimaev went from an unknown fighter living in Sweden to arguably the most terrifying prospect the UFC had seen in years. He fought 3 times, finished all 3 opponents, absorbed almost no damage, and looked so dominant that people immediately started asking a ridiculous question. Is this guy already championship level? Dana White called him special. Fans called him the next Khabib. And fighters? Fighters were terrified to even say his name, because prime Khamzat Chimaev wasn't just winning. He was running through professional fighters like they didn't belong in the cage with him. In this video, we'll talk about how good prime Khamzat Chimaev really is, why his rise felt almost supernatural, how his wrestling became one of the scariest weapons in MMA, why elite fighters avoided him for years, and whether the version of Chimaev we saw at his peak might genuinely be one of the most dangerous fighters the UFC has ever seen. And it all started long before the UFC. Before the fame, before the screaming promos, before I smash everybody became a meme. Khamzat Chimaev was a refugee kid from Chechnya. Born in 1994 during one of the darkest periods in Chechen history, Chimaev grew up surrounded by instability and violence. Like many fighters from the Caucasus region, wrestling became more than a sport. It was survival, discipline, identity. And from a young age, Khamzat was obsessed with combat. He started wrestling as a child and quickly showed insane physicality. Coaches talked about his aggression, his pressure, his ability to overwhelm people. Even then, he had that same style we see today. Constant forward movement and zero fear. Eventually, his family moved to Sweden, and that changed everything. In Sweden, Chimaev began training seriously in wrestling and MMA. He won multiple national wrestling championships and developed into one of the strongest grapplers in the country. But unlike many elite wrestlers entering MMA, Khamzat didn't want to slowly learn striking. He wanted violence. By the time he started his professional MMA career in 2018, people in Swedish gyms already knew something was different about him. Fighters talked about how ridiculously strong he was, how he could take people down without even fully setting it up, how sparring with him felt exhausting after just 1 round. And once his pro career began, the destruction started immediately. Khamzat finished opponent after opponent on the regional scene. Knockouts, submissions, ground and pound massacres. He wasn't just beating people, he was making them look helpless. Still, outside of hardcore MMA circles, nobody really knew who he was. Then came the UFC, and everything changed. In July 2020, during the COVID era, when the UFC desperately needed fighters willing to stay active, Khamzat Chimaev made his debut against John Phillips. Now on paper, Phillips was dangerous. He had knockout power, experience, and people thought if he could keep the fight standing, he had a chance. Instead, Khamzat treated him like a training dummy. He took Phillips down almost immediately, passed guard effortlessly, controlled him for nearly the entire fight, and landed so many unanswered strikes the commentators started laughing in disbelief. The craziest part? John Phillips landed 1 significant strike. 1. For an entire fight, Khamzat completely controlled another UFC fighter like it was an amateur mismatch. Then just 10 days later, he fought again. Most fighters take months between fights. Khamzat took 10 days. Against Rhys McKee, the result was somehow even scarier. Again, relentless pressure. Again, dominant wrestling. Again, complete destruction. He walked through McKee, took him down instantly, beat him up, finished him in the first round. Back-to-back UFC wins in 10 days. And suddenly, the hype exploded. But then came the moment that truly changed his career. Gerald Meerschaert. Now, unlike the previous opponents, Meerschaert was respected. He had over 40 professional fights and one of the best submission games in the division. Many people believed this would finally test Chimaev on the ground. Instead, Khamzat walked to the center of the cage, threw one right hand, and knocked him unconscious in 17 seconds. 17. That was the moment people stopped viewing him as a prospect. Now he was a problem, because usually dominant wrestlers have weaknesses. Maybe their striking is limited. Maybe their cardio fades. Maybe they struggle with elite athletes. But Chimaev suddenly looked terrifying everywhere. And the scares where he looked uncomfortable. He just walked through people. At that point, the UFC was pushing him harder than almost anybody in recent memory. Fans were comparing him to Khabib Nurmagomedov. Others compared him to a young Brock Lesnar mixed with a middleweight version of Georges St-Pierre. But stylistically, Khamzat picked Lee up with one arm, carried him across the octagon while talking to Dana White cageside, then slammed him down and submitted him. That shouldn't happen in elite MMA. You are not supposed to manhandle ranked welterweights like children. But Prime Khamzat did things that made professional fights expected you to win anyway. And during his rise, he barely absorbed damage. Through his first 4 UFC fights, he absorbed a total of 2 significant strikes. 2. That stat sounds fake. Then came COVID, and this changed the trajectory of his career dramatically. After contracting COVID-19 in 2020, Chimaev suffered severe complications. He talked publicly about coughing blood, struggling to breathe, and nearly retiring from performance re-established him as arguably the most dangerous contender in the UFC. Then came the biggest